Blood trickled down Malcolm's chin as he clutched his shattered jaw, the flight attendant towering over him with cold eyes. In the stunned silence of first class, no one moved until Federal Judge Elaine Richardson rose from seat 2 amperes, her voice cutting through the cabin. This ends now. Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice, at 30000 feet, take a moment to let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more real stories of justice, prevailing against all odds. Now let's find out how a routine flight turned into a nightmare for one young boy and the unexpected hero who stood up when no one else would. 12-year-old Malcolm Washington stood at gate B-17 in Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, his brand-new blue backpack clutched tightly against his chest. This was his first time flying alone as an unaccompanied minor, and though he tried to appear confident, his knuckles were white from gripping the backpack straps. "You have your boarding pass?" His mother Tara asked for the third time, smoothing down his collar with nervous fingers. "Yes, Mom," Malcolm replied, patiently pulling the document from his pocket. "And my ID card and Dad's address and the contact information form." Tara nodded, but Malcolm could see the worry etched in the lines around her eyes. At 34, his mother had already experienced enough racial discrimination to last a lifetime. She'd spent the past week preparing Malcolm for this journey, not just with packing lists and travel documents, but with careful instructions on how to conduct himself. "Remember what we talked about," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, even though no one was nearby. "Be polite. Speak clearly. Don't raise your voice no matter what. Keep your hands visible at all times. Don't argue, even if you're right." Malcolm nodded solemnly. At 12, he already understood what his mother meant. As a young black boy, he had to be twice as careful, twice as polite, twice as perfect as anyone else. "I'll be fine, Mom," he assured her. "I got the window seat in first class, just like Dad arranged." His father, Drake, a software engineer in Chicago with joint custody, had used his frequent flyer miles to upgrade Malcolm's seat. The summer STEM program Malcolm had earned a scholarship to attend was highly competitive. Only 30 students from across the country had been selected. Drake had been bursting with pride when Malcolm was accepted, insisting his son travel in comfort for this important trip. Across the terminal, Federal Judge Elaine Richardson was purchasing a coffee before her own flight to Chicago. At 53, Richardson had built a reputation as one of the most respected jurists in the Seventh Circuit. She was returning from a judicial conference where she delivered the keynote address on equity in the justice system. As an African-American woman who had risen through the ranks during times when both her gender and race were seen as obstacles, she understood better than most the prejudices that still permeated American institutions. She checked her watch. Flight 1382 would begin boarding in 20 minutes. Just enough time to review her notes for the sentencing hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, 15-year Alliance Airlines veteran Brian Connor was reviewing the passenger manifest for the Chicago flight. As the lead flight attendant for first class, he took pride in knowing his premium passengers and their needs. His eyes narrowed slightly as he noticed the designation unaccompanied minor in seat 3C. Those were always extra work. His gaze lingered on the last name Washington, probably using a voucher or some promotion, he thought. First class wasn't what it used to be. Back at the gate, the boarding announcement came through the speakers. Tara hugged Malcolm tightly. "Text me the minute you land," she insisted. "I will," Malcolm promised. He felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as he joined the priority boarding line. His hand brushed against the pocket, holding his prized possession, a tablet containing the advanced coding project he'd been working on for months. The summer program instructors had asked participants to bring examples of their work, and Malcolm was eager to show what he could do. As Malcolm stepped onto the plane, flight attendant Connor gave him a quick once-over. "You're in first class?" Connor asked, his tone carrying a hint of disbelief. Malcolm nodded and presented his boarding pass. "Yes, sir. Seat 3C. Connor checked the boarding pass, his smile tightening. "Right this way," he said stiffly. From seat 2 amperes, Judge Richardson observed the interaction with casual interest. She'd been watching people's behavior patterns for decades. It was part of what made her an effective judge. Something in the flight attendant's demeanor caught her attention, but she returned to her legal brief, not yet realizing the significance of what she'd witnessed. Malcolm settled into his window seat, carefully stowing his backpack beneath the seat in front of him as the safety instructions had specified. He was determined to follow every rule perfectly. His father had spent hard-earned miles for this upgrade, and Malcolm wanted to make both his parents proud. As the remaining passengers boarded, Malcolm noticed how Connor greeted the other first-class passengers, mostly white businessmen, with warm smiles and offers to hang up jackets or stow briefcases. When Malcolm made eye contact, hoping for the same offer for his backpack, Connor looked away and moved on. Malcolm told himself it didn't matter. He was here to focus on his upcoming program, not worry about a flight attendant's behavior. Still, a familiar discomfort settled in his stomach. The feeling of being viewed differently, of being an outsider in a space where he had every right to be. From her seat, Judge Richardson observed these subtle interactions. She'd experienced similar treatment herself over the years, though her title and position now often shielded her from the most blatant forms. She made a mental note to keep an eye on the situation, but didn't intervene. Not every slight required action, and she'd learned to pick her battles carefully. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Malcolm gazed out the window with wonder. Despite everything, excitement bubbled up inside him. He was flying to Chicago alone, heading to a prestigious program he'd earned through hard work and talent. Nothing could diminish that accomplishment. Little did he know that this routine flight was about to become anything but ordinary. The Boeing 737 reached its cruising altitude with a gentle leveling motion that Malcolm found fascinating. He'd been studying physics in his advanced placement classes and understood the principles behind flight, but experiencing them firsthand was entirely different. He watched the clouds drift by his window momentarily, forgetting his earlier discomfort. 20 minutes into the flight, Brian Connor began the first-class beverage service. He moved methodically down the aisle, starting from the front. "Good afternoon, Judge Richardson," he said warmly to the woman in 2 amperes, having recognized her name from the passenger manifest. "What can I get you to drink today?" "Sparkling water with lime, please," she replied, setting aside her legal documents. Connor served her with a flourish, placing a linen napkin on her tray table before setting down the drink. "Let me know if you need anything else, Your Honor." He continued through the cabin, offering attentive service to each passenger, each except Malcolm. When Connor reached row 3, he served the businessman in 3 amperes and 3B, then simply passed by Malcolm without acknowledgement. Malcolm waited patiently, assuming the flight attendant would return. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The drink cart moved to economy class, and still Malcolm sat without service. Finally, he pressed his call button. Connor's face tightened when he returned to Malcolm's seat. "Yes," he asked, curtly. "May I have some apple juice, please?" Malcolm asked politely, exactly as his mother had taught him. "The service period is over," Connor replied. "You should have asked when I was serving your row." Malcolm's brow furrowed slightly in confusion. "But you didn't." "I don't have time to argue," Connor interrupted. "I'll bring it when I can." 15 minutes later, a plastic cup of apple juice, no ice, no napkin, was placed on Malcolm's tray table without a word. Unlike the other passengers who received refills throughout the flight, Malcolm's empty cup remained untouched when Connor collected trash. Judge Richardson noticed these discrepancies, but initially attributed them to the busy service flow. However, as the pattern continued, she began paying closer attention to the interactions between Connor and the young passenger. When lunch was served, the situation escalated. Malcolm received his meal tray last, and unlike others who were offered their choice of entree, he was simply handed a tray with no options presented. "Excuse me," Malcolm said softly when he noticed his meal had no utensils. "Could I have some silverware, please?" Connor's response was just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Everything should be on your tray. I can't keep making special trips." Malcolm looked down at his lap, his cheeks burning with embarrassment. An older white man across the aisle noticed the exchange and discreetly passed Malcolm a spare set of utensils from his own tray. Malcolm thanked him with a grateful nod. The flight encountered moderate turbulence halfway through the meal service. The fasten seatbelt sign illuminated with a ding, and Connor announced that passengers should return to their seats immediately. Malcolm, who had been following all instructions meticulously, was already properly seated with his tray table secure. A sudden strong air pocket caused the plane to drop several feet without warning. Several passengers gasped, and Malcolm's apple juice tipped over, spilling onto his tray and dripping slightly onto the carpet. Connor was at his seat instantly. "Look what you've done," he hissed, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'm sorry," Malcolm said, reaching for his napkin. "The turbulence. You people always make a mess," Connor muttered, just loud enough for those in adjacent seats to hear. He roughly dabbed at the spill with a cloth, making no effort to hide his annoyance. Judge Richardson's head turned sharply at the comment. The coded language was unmistakable to her trained ear. She discreetly took out her phone and began documenting the interactions, keeping the device partially hidden behind her legal pad. Malcolm sat perfectly still, his face a careful mask that hid his churning emotions. His mother's warnings echoed in his mind. Don't react. Don't give them any reason. Stay calm. When the turbulence subsided, Malcolm tried to clean up the remaining juice with his cocktail napkin. Finding it insufficient, he pressed the call button again to request additional napkins. Connor returned, visibly irritated. "What now?" "May I have some more napkins for the spill, please?" Malcolm asked, his voice carefully modulated to remain respectful despite his growing discomfort. "Stop harassing the crew," Connor snapped. "The call button is for emergencies only." A middle-aged white woman in first class frowned at this exchange. "He just needs napkins," she said, the boys being perfectly polite. Connor forced a smile. "I'll handle this, ma'am." To Malcolm, his tone changed completely. "This is your final warning about the call button." As Connor walked away without providing napkins, the tension in the first-class cabin was palpable. Passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some looked away, unwilling to get involved. Others watched with growing concern. Judge Richardson was now recording each interaction on her phone notes, time-stamping them meticulously. As a federal judge, she had seen countless cases where documentation made all the difference. Something about this situation felt increasingly wrong, and her judicial instincts were on high alert. Malcolm sat perfectly still, trying to make himself as small and unobtrusive as possible. The coding competition he'd been so excited about now seemed distant and unimportant compared to the immediate challenge of getting through this flight without further incident. But the worst was yet to come. As Flight 1382 began its initial descent into Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom announcing they were 30 minutes from landing. Passengers throughout the cabin began preparing, stowing items, straightening seats, and visiting the lavatories one final time before the seatbelt sign illuminated. Malcolm had been reading quietly on his tablet, escaping into the world of advanced coding algorithms to distract himself from the tension of the flight. When the announcement came, he carefully saved his work and prepared to stow his device. His hand hovered over the power button when Brian Connor appeared at his row. "Your tray table needs to be stowed for landing," Connor stated sharply, despite the fact that the tray was already properly stored and locked. Malcolm looked up in confusion. "It's already up, sir," he replied respectfully. Connor's eyes narrowed. "Don't contradict me. I can see it's down from here." The businessman in seat 3B glanced over with a furrowed brow. "His tray is definitely up," he confirmed. Connor ignored the comment and focused entirely on Malcolm. And electronic devices need to be turned off and stowed now. Malcolm nodded.
Yes, sir. I was just saving my work and about to turn it off.
Give it here, Connor demanded, extending his hand. All electronics need to be collected from unaccompanied minors. This was a fabrication. Alliance Airlines had no such policy. Malcolm, though young, sensed the falsehood but didn't want to create a scene. Still, this tablet contained months of irreplaceable work for his upcoming program.
I'll put it away right now,
Malcolm promised, moving to slide the tablet into his backpack beneath the seat. Connor's hand shot out and grabbed the device. I said, give it to me. Malcolm instinctively held onto his tablet, not pulling it away, but not releasing it either. Please, he said, his voice rising slightly with anxiety. This has all my coding projects for my summer program. I promise I'll keep it turned off until... Let go now, Connor hissed, yanking the tablet. He's not doing anything wrong, Judge Richardson said clearly from her seat, now fully attentive to the escalating situation. Connor twisted the tablet from Malcolm's grasp with unnecessary force. As the device came free, he deliberately pushed Malcolm back against his seat. Don't you dare put your hands on me, Connor said loudly, his voice carrying throughout the quiet cabin. This passenger just assaulted me. Malcolm's eyes widened in shock and fear.
No, I didn't. I was just...
Sit down and shut up, Connor snapped, his face flushed with anger. The 12-year-old's eyes filled with tears of frustration and fear. But he remained in his seat, as instructed, intensely aware of everyone watching. Judge Richardson unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Return that tablet immediately, she commanded, in the same authoritative tone that had silenced many a courtroom. Your behavior is completely inappropriate. Connor turned toward her, his expression darkening. Ma'am, please return to your seat. This minor attempted to assault a crew member, which is a federal offense. That's absolutely false, said the businessman in 3B. Several other passengers murmured in agreement. Malcolm, frightened by the escalation but emboldened by the support, reached toward his tablet again. Please, just let me put it in my backpack. It has all my work. What happened next occurred so quickly that later accounts from witnesses varied slightly. Connor, enraged at having his authority questioned, swung around with the tablet still in hand. Whether intentional or reckless, his arm connected with Malcolm's face with devastating force, the edge of the tablet striking the boy's jaw. A sickening crack echoed through the cabin. Malcolm's head snapped back from the impact. When he straightened, blood was already streaming from his mouth. His jaw hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. The child's eyes were wide with shock and pain as he raised trembling fingers to his face. The cabin erupted in gasps and shouts. Several passengers unbuckled their seatbelts, half rising from their seats in alarm. He hit that child. Someone cried out. Connor stepped back, momentarily stunned by the outcome of his actions. He quickly recovered, reverting to self-preservation. He lunged at me. I was defending myself. Malcolm couldn't speak. Blood trickled from his mouth as he made a terrible whimpering sound, tears streaming down his face as he clutched his shattered jaw. In that moment of shocked silence, Federal Judge Elaine Richardson rose to her full height from seat 2 amperes, her voice cutting through the chaos with the practiced authority of decades on the bench. This ends now, she declared, her words silencing the cabin. I am Federal Judge Elaine Richardson of the 7th Circuit Court. I have witnessed and documented this entire incident. This child has been assaulted, and I am intervening officially. She stepped into the aisle, physically positioning herself between Malcolm and Connor. Captain, she called toward the cockpit. This is Federal Judge Richardson requesting immediate intervention and an emergency landing. We have an injured minor who needs immediate medical attention and a flight attendant who needs to be removed from duty. Connor's face paled as he realized who he was facing. You don't understand, he was. Save it for your arraignment, Judge Richardson cut him off coldly. I've documented everything. You've just committed assault and battery on a minor in front of dozens of witnesses, including a federal judge." The captain's voice came over the intercom moments later. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're diverting to Cincinnati for an emergency situation. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be landing in approximately 15 minutes. Judge Richardson knelt beside Malcolm, whose face was contorted with pain, blood continuing to drip from his mouth. "I'm going to help you," she said gently to the terrified boy. "I saw everything. You did nothing wrong. Help is coming, and I promise you justice will be served." The wheels of Flight 1382 screeched against the runway at Cincinnati, divided by Northern Kentucky International Airport, exactly 12 minutes after the captain announced their emergency diversion. Red and blue lights from emergency vehicles flashed against the tarmac, visible through the plane windows as they approached the gate. Inside the cabin, Malcolm Washington remained frozen in seat 3C, his small body rigid with shock and pain. Blood had soaked through the makeshift compress Judge Richardson had fashioned from clean napkins provided by horrified passengers. The boy's eyes were wide and glazed, his breathing shallow as he endured the agony of his shattered jaw. Judge Richardson hadn't left his side. She maintained a gentle pressure on his shoulder with one hand while continuing to document events with her phone in the other. Brian Connor had been ordered to the rear of the aircraft by the captain, where he remained under the watchful eye of the co-pilot, who had emerged from the cockpit. "We're almost there, Malcolm," Judge Richardson assured him softly. "The paramedics will take good care of you." The moment the aircraft door opened, emergency medical personnel rushed aboard. They moved efficiently through the cabin, medical bags in hand, following the captain's directions to Malcolm's seat. 12-year-old male, suspected mandibular fracture, possible concussion, the lead paramedic announced as her team carefully assessed. "Malcolm, let's get him stabilized for transport." As they worked, a pair of airport police officers boarded, followed by airline representatives in crisp uniforms bearing the Alliance Airlines logo. The corporate damage control had already begun. "I'm Diane Mercer, Customer Service Director," announced a poised woman with a practiced sympathetic expression. "We're deeply concerned about this unfortunate incident." Judge Richardson straightened to her full height. "This was no incident, Miss Mercer. This was assault on a minor. I am Federal Judge Elaine Richardson of the 7th Circuit, and I witnessed the entire sequence of events." The airline representative's professional smile faltered. "Of course, Your Honor. Alliance Airlines takes any allegation of misconduct extremely seriously." "These aren't allegations," interrupted the businessman from seat 3B, standing now. He held up his phone. "I recorded the whole thing. Your employee struck this child deliberately." Several other passengers murmured in agreement, some holding up their own phones, indicating they had footage as well. The paramedics had carefully stabilized Malcolm's jaw with a temporary brace and were preparing to move him to a stretcher. One of them looked up at the police officers. "This kid needs to get to Cincinnati Children's Hospital immediately. His jaw is broken in at least 2 places from what I can tell." The airport police officers exchanged glances, then approached Brian Connor at the rear of the plane. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one officer stated firmly. Connor's face had lost its earlier confidence. "This is ridiculous. The kid attacked me. I was just defending myself." "Alliance has procedures for unruly passengers." "Save it," the second officer interrupted. "Multiple witnesses contradict your story, and we have video evidence." As the officers escorted Connor from the plane, another airline representative approached Judge Richardson. "Your Honor, if we could speak privately about this situation, Alliance Airlines is prepared to offer immediate accommodation to address this unfortunate misunderstanding." Judge Richardson's expression hardened. "Let me be perfectly clear. This child has suffered a serious injury due to the deliberately discriminatory and violent actions of your employee. I will be providing my contact information to this child's parents, and I suggest you prepare your legal team. This situation, as you call it, will be addressed in court. Meanwhile, the paramedics were carefully transferring Malcolm to a stretcher. The boy whimpered in pain despite the preliminary medication they'd administered. "Has anyone contacted his parents?" one of the paramedics asked. "I've been trying to reach them," Judge Richardson replied. "He's an unaccompanied minor traveling from Atlanta to Chicago. His mother is in Atlanta and his father is waiting in Chicago." A young flight attendant stepped forward, not Connor, but another crew member who had been working in economy class. "I have his travel information with emergency contacts," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She handed over a tablet with Malcolm's details. As Malcolm was being carried out, Judge Richardson gathered her belongings and prepared to follow. The Alliance Airlines representatives tried once more to intervene. "Judge Richardson, we really should discuss how to handle this privately. Perhaps we could offer—" "Miss Mercer, I've spent 30 years on the bench. I know an attempt at a cover-up when I see one," Richardson replied coldly. "Right now, my priority is ensuring this child receives proper medical care and is reunited with his family. Alliance Airlines will have plenty of time to explain its actions in court." At Cincinnati Children's Hospital, organized chaos ensued as Malcolm was rushed into the emergency department. X-rays confirmed what the paramedics had suspected. His jaw was broken in 3 places, requiring immediate surgery. The medical team moved quickly, preparing him for the operating room while simultaneously trying to reach his parents. In the midst of this flurry of activity, Tara Washington finally received the call every parent dreads. She had been tracking Malcolm's flight online, confused when she saw it diverting to Cincinnati instead of continuing to Chicago. When her phone rang with an unfamiliar Ohio number, her heart had already been racing with worry. The news sent her into a controlled panic. Within minutes, she was booking the next flight to Cincinnati, her hand shaking so badly she could barely complete the transaction. In Chicago, Drake Washington received similar news. He immediately left his office, racing to his car to begin the 5-hour drive to Cincinnati, unwilling to wait for a flight. Back at the airport, the situation was growing increasingly complex. Alliance Airlines' PR team had assembled in a conference room, crafting statements and planning their response. Brian Connor had been taken to a private room for questioning by airport police, while airline lawyers arrived to manage what was quickly becoming a corporate crisis. What are your thoughts on this shocking situation so far? Comment number 1 if you believe Judge Richardson was right to immediately step in and use her authority. Or number 2, if you think she should have waited for the captain to handle the situation. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to hear what happens next in this incredible story of injustice and accountability. But wait. What will happen when Malcolm's parents finally arrive at the hospital? Will Alliance Airlines try to sweep this incident under the rug? And what consequences await Brian Connor for his horrific actions? Stay with us as this powerful story continues to unfold. The fluorescent lights of Cincinnati Children's Hospital cast harsh shadows across Tara Washington's exhausted face as she sat vigil beside her son's hospital bed. Malcolm lay unconscious, his jaw wired shut, following a 3-hour surgery to repair the extensive damage. Titanium plates now held together the 3 fractures in his mandible, and his swollen face was nearly unrecognizable beneath the bandages. Tara gently stroked her son's hand, careful to avoid disturbing the IV line. Her eyes, red-rimmed from crying, occasionally darted to the monitors tracking his vital signs. Every beep and fluctuation sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her body. In the corner of the room, Judge Elaine Richardson sat quietly making notes on her tablet. She had refused to leave until Malcolm's parents arrived, determined that the boy would have an advocate in his corner every step of the way. When Tara had burst into the hospital 5 hours earlier, frantic and disoriented, Richardson had been waiting to brief her on exactly what had occurred. A soft knock on the door interrupted the tense silence. Drake Washington entered his tall frame, appearing diminished by worry and exhaustion after the long drive from Chicago. His eyes immediately went to his son, widening in horror at the sight of Malcolm's injured face. "My God," he whispered, crossing the room in 3 quick strides to stand at the bedside. "My boy, what did they do to you?" Tara stood embracing her ex-husband briefly before they both turned their attention back to their child. Despite their divorce 2 years earlier, the sight of their son in a hospital bed instantly united them in shared grief and anger. "The surgeon says he'll recover," Tara said softly, "but he'll need at least 6 weeks with his jaw wired, followed by months of physical therapy. They don't yet know if there will be permanent nerve damage." Drake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And the man who did this, where is he now?" Judge Richardson stood extending her hand. "Mr. Washington, I'm Federal Judge Elaine Richardson. I witnessed the entire incident and can assure you that Brian Connor was taken into police custody at the airport. Thank you for staying with our son Drake," said, shaking her hand firmly. "Tara told me what you did. If you hadn't been there." The judge nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, Alliance Airlines is already working to control the narrative. Their PR team released a statement an hour ago, characterizing the incident as an unfortunate accident during turbulence." Tara made a sound of disbelief. "Accident? You told me he deliberately struck Malcolm." "He absolutely did," Richardson confirmed. "And we have multiple witnesses and video evidence to prove it. But corporations this size have well-established playbooks for managing incidents like this." As if summoned by her words, another knock came at the door. A polished woman in an expensive suit entered, flanked by a man carrying a leather briefcase. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington," the woman inquired smoothly. "Miss Washington," Tara corrected automatically. "We're divorced." "Of course. My apologies. I'm Jennifer Caldwell, Senior Vice President of Customer Relations for Alliance Airlines," she said, her practiced smile never reaching her eyes. "This is Martin Ross, our legal counsel. First, let me express our deepest regrets about your son's injury." Drake stepped forward, physically placing himself between the airline representatives and Malcolm's bed. "Regrets? Your employee assaulted our 12-year-old son and broke his jaw in 3 places." Caldwell maintained her professional demeanor. "We understand this is an extremely upsetting situation, which is why we've come personally to discuss resolution options. The only resolution I'm interested in is seeing that man in prison," Tara said, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. Martin Ross cleared his throat, opening his briefcase. "Alliance Airlines is prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement package that includes full coverage of all medical expenses, significant compensation for pain and suffering, and unlimited first-class travel for your family for life." He removed a thick document and placed it on the small table near the door. "This offer comes with a standard confidentiality agreement, of course." Judge Richardson stepped forward. "Let me translate that. Alliance Airlines wants to buy your silence with a settlement that probably amounts to less than what they'd spend on a single day of negative publicity." Caldwell's smile tightened. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this is a private discussion between Alliance Airlines and the Washington family. And Malcolm is my client," came a new voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see a tall, distinguished black man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. He strode confidently into the room, placing his business card on top of the settlement document. "Terrence Franklin, civil rights attorney. Judge Richardson contacted me and the Washingtons have retained my services." Drake and Tara exchanged surprised glances but didn't contradict him. Franklin continued smoothly. "My client will not be signing anything today, and I suggest you take your standard confidentiality agreement with you when you leave, which I recommend you do immediately. This child needs rest, not corporate intimidation tactics." Martin Ross's expression hardened. "Mr. Franklin, we're simply trying to resolve this matter efficiently for all parties. Our offer is more than generous." "Your offer is an attempt to silence victims of discrimination and violence," Franklin replied coldly. "And I should inform you that we'll be filing not only civil charges against both Mr. Connor and Alliance Airlines, but also pursuing federal civil rights violations. Caldwell's professional facade cracked slightly. That's completely unwarranted. There's no evidence this was anything but an isolated incident with an employee who has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Judge Richardson raised an eyebrow. Administrative leave, not terminated. Interesting choice for an employee who assaulted a minor. Tara stood abruptly. I want you both to leave. Now. My son is recovering from major surgery and you're in here trying to get us to sign away his rights. We're only trying to help, Caldwell insisted, but the unified front of the Washingtons, Judge Richardson and Attorney Franklin made it clear the conversation was over. As the airline representatives retreated, Franklin turned to the family. I hope you don't mind my presumption in announcing myself as your attorney. Judge Richardson briefed me on the situation, and I wanted to intervene before you were pressured into accepting an inadequate settlement. We're grateful, Drake said firmly. But can we really fight an airline this big? Franklin's expression was grimly determined. Not only can we fight them, but we're going to win. Judge Richardson's testimony alone is compelling, but there's more. In the hours since this happened, my team has been researching Alliance Airlines' history. This isn't the first time they've had complaints about discriminatory treatment from minority passengers. He opened his tablet and showed them news articles and social media posts documenting previous incidents. Most cases were settled quietly or dismissed due to lack of evidence. But this time they picked the wrong family to victimize. Outside the hospital, Jennifer Caldwell made a call from her car. They've already retained Terrence Franklin, she reported tensely. And Judge Richardson is personally involved. The voice on the other end cursed softly. Implement Crisis Protocol Delta. I want Connor's personnel files sanitized. Any previous complaints need to disappear. Get our media contacts to run with the unfortunate accident angle and find something, anything we can use to discredit the boy or his family. Understood, Caldwell replied, ending the call. What she didn't know was that across town, a tech-savvy passenger from Flight 1382 was uploading their video of the incident to social media, where it was already beginning to attract attention. The carefully crafted Alliance Airlines statement about an accident during turbulence was about to collide with unedited reality. Back in Malcolm's hospital room, the boy stirred slightly, his eyes fluttering open to find both his parents at his bedside. Unable to speak with his jaw wired shut, tears of pain and relief slid down his swollen cheeks as he realized he wasn't alone anymore. Tara gently squeezed his hand. We're here, baby. And we're gonna make sure nothing like this ever happens to you or anyone else again. Meanwhile, at Alliance Airlines headquarters, a team of IT specialists was working frantically to locate and erase Brian Connor's history of complaints from minority passengers. Database records were being modified, complaint files shredded, and a sanitized personnel history constructed to show Connor as an exemplary employee with no previous incidents. What they couldn't erase, however, were the memories of former passengers who had experienced Connor's discriminatory behavior firsthand. As news of the incident spread, these individuals began coming forward their stories, creating a damning pattern that would soon become impossible to ignore. The battle lines were being drawn in what would become not just a legal case, but a very public referendum on how America's institutions responded to racism and violence against minority children. The marble floors of the federal courthouse echoed with determined footsteps as Terrence Franklin led the Washington family down the corridor toward courtroom 4B. 2 weeks had passed since the incident on Flight 1382, and today marked the first preliminary hearing in what promised to be a landmark case. Malcolm walked between his parents, his jaw still wired shut, and his face showing the yellow-green remnants of bruising. Despite the pain medication, each step was an effort as he recovered from his surgery. Nevertheless, he held himself straight, refusing to be seen as a victim. The navy blue suit his father had purchased for the occasion hung slightly loose on his frame. He'd lost 7 pounds since the incident, unable to eat solid food. Behind them, Judge Elaine Richardson followed at a respectful distance. Though not directly involved in today's proceedings, she had come to provide moral support and would later be a key witness in the case. Her presence sent a clear message to everyone in the courthouse about the seriousness of the situation. Reporters clustered near the entrance to the courtroom, held back by court officers, but still shouting questions as the family approached. "Mr. Franklin, will you be pursuing hate crime charges? Malcolm, how are you feeling today? Miss Washington, what do you hope will come from today's hearing?" Franklin skillfully guided the family through the media gauntlet without engaging, his face set in the determined expression that had earned him the nickname the Velvet Hammer among his legal peers, smooth and polished on the surface, devastating in impact. Inside the courtroom, Alliance Airlines had assembled an imposing defense team. 6 attorneys in expensive suits sat at their tables, surrounded by stacks of documents and electronic displays. At the center was Howard Griffith, the airline's chief counsel, known for his aggressive defense strategies and undefeated record in corporate litigation. Brian Connor sat beside them, almost unrecognizable from the arrogant flight attendant who had struck Malcolm. Gone was the airline uniform, replaced by a conservative suit. His previously slicked-back hair was now styled in a softer, more approachable manner, and he wore wire-rimmed glasses that hadn't been present during the flight. The transformation was clearly intended to present him as a mild-mannered professional rather than the volatile man who had broken a child's jaw. As the Washingtons took their seats at the plaintiff's table, Connor avoided looking in their direction, staring straight ahead with a practiced expression of somber regret. The bailiff called the court to order as Judge William Harmon entered. A veteran jurist with 30 years on the federal bench, Harmon was known for his strict adherence to procedural detail and intolerance for courtroom theatrics. "Be seated," he instructed, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the documents before him. "We're here for preliminary motions in the case of Washington versus Connor and Alliance Airlines. Let the record show that the plaintiff minor, Malcolm Washington, is present with his parents and legal counsel." Franklin rose. "Terrence Franklin, for the plaintiff, Your Honor. We've submitted our motion for expedited discovery, given the concerning reports that evidence may be at risk of manipulation or destruction." Griffith immediately stood. "Howard Griffith, for the defense, Your Honor. These accusations are baseless and defamatory. Alliance Airlines maintains rigorous data preservation protocols." Judge Harmon peered over his glasses. "I've reviewed the motion, Mr. Franklin. You allege that Alliance Airlines has already attempted to alter employee records and complaint histories. That's a serious accusation. One we're prepared to substantiate, Your Honor," Franklin replied confidently. "We have affidavits from 3 former Alliance employees confirming they were instructed to modify records related to Mr. Connor's employment history, specifically removing prior complaints of discriminatory behavior toward minority passengers." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Griffith's face tightened momentarily before he regained his composure. "Pure hearsay, Your Honor. Disgruntled former employees making unsubstantiated claims." Additionally, Franklin continued, "We have evidence that Alliance Airlines released a public statement characterizing the assault as an accident during turbulence, despite having access to multiple witness statements and video, evidence confirming it was a deliberate act." Judge Harmon frowned. "Mr. Griffith, these allegations give me pause. I'm inclined to grant the motion for expedited discovery and appoint a neutral third party to secure all relevant records immediately." Griffith attempted to object, but the judge cut him off with a raised hand. "Furthermore, I'm issuing a preservation order covering all records related to Mr. Connor's employment customer complaints involving Mr. Connor and Alliance Airlines unaccompanied minor policies." The first round had gone decisively to the Washingtons, but Griffith wasn't finished. He cleared his throat adjusting his tie. Your Honor, we have a motion of our own. The defense requests that all video of the alleged incident be sealed and barred from public release, as it could prejudice potential jurors. Franklin stepped forward. Your Honor, the video evidence is crucial, and the public has a right. The public has a right to a fair judicial process, Mr. Franklin Griffith interrupted. Videos circulating on social media create a trial by public opinion. Judge Harmon considered this. I'm partially granting the defense motion. Videos may be referenced in court filings, but not released publicly until trial. However, this restriction applies equally to both parties, including Alliance Airlines' PR department. As the hearing continued, the legal maneuvering grew increasingly complex. Alliance Airlines sought to separate the cases against Connor personally and the airline corporately, a strategy aimed at limiting their liability. Franklin successfully argued against this, presenting evidence that Connor's behavior reflected systemic problems within Alliance's culture and training. In the gallery, Judge Richardson watched the proceedings with the experienced eye of someone who had presided over countless similar hearings. She noted how Griffith subtly emphasized Connor's unblemished 20-year career and momentary lapse in judgment, attempting to frame the incident as an anomaly rather than part of a pattern. But the most revealing moment came when Griffith introduced a new motion to admit character evidence about Malcolm and his family. Your Honor, we've discovered that the plaintiff's cousin has a juvenile record for assault, suggesting a family predisposition toward violent behavior that may have influenced the minor's actions during the flight. Tara gasped audibly. Her nephew had indeed been in trouble years ago for defending himself against racist bullying at school. The incident had been expunged from his record after community service, but somehow, Alliance's investigators had uncovered it. Franklin was on his feet instantly. This is outrageous, Your Honor. The plaintiff is a 12-year-old honor student with no disciplinary history whatsoever. This is nothing but character assassination by distant association and transparently prejudicial. Judge Harmon's expression darkened. Mr. Griffith, I'm not only denying this motion, but warning you that such tactics border on ethical violations. The plaintiff is a minor and distant. Relatives' sealed juvenile records have zero relevance to this case. Griffith retreated, but the message had been sent. Alliance Airlines was willing to fight dirty digging into the family's background to find anything they could use, no matter how tenuous or inappropriate. Outside the courtroom, after the hearing concluded, Franklin briefed the Washington family on what to expect next. Today was just the opening salvo, he explained. Alliance is going to try to drag this out, wear us down, and find any angle they can to discredit Malcolm's account. They're investigating our family. Tara asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Franklin nodded grimly. Standard tactic for corporate defense teams with deep pockets. They'll look for anything they can use. Social media posts, distant relatives with legal troubles, academic records, medical history. They're hoping to find something that makes Malcolm seem less sympathetic to a jury. Drake's jaw clenched. My son is the victim here. He had his jaw broken by an airline employee while peacefully sitting in his seat. And that's exactly the truth we'll keep at the center of this case, Franklin assured him. But you need to be prepared for what's coming. This gets worse before it gets better. As if to confirm his warning, a breaking news alert appeared on Franklin's phone. He frowned as he read the screen. What is it? Tara asked. A tabloid just ran a story, Troubled Family History Behind Airline Incident. They're quoting anonymous sources familiar with the Washington family. Malcolm, unable to speak, pulled out his phone and typed a message showing it to his parents and attorney. They're trying to make this about us instead of what their employee did. Franklin nodded, impressed by the young man's insight. Exactly right, Malcolm. And we're not going to let them get away with it. As they left the courthouse, more reporters waited, shouting questions. This time, Franklin paused, making a brief statement to the assembled media. Today, the court granted our motion for expedited discovery and preservation of evidence, recognizing the serious nature of this case. Let me be clear. This is not just about one incident or one family. This is about whether corporations can act with impunity when their employees discriminate against and physically harm minority children. The Washington family is prepared for a long fight, not just for themselves, but for every child who deserves to travel safely, regardless of the color of their skin. The clip would run on every major news network that evening, shifting the narrative back to where it belonged: on Alliance Airlines' actions, not on the Washington family's history. Meanwhile, in the Alliance Airlines executive suite, the leadership team was meeting to assess the damage. The CEO slammed his fist on the conference table. How did we lose control of this narrative? We're getting killed in the court of public opinion. The head of legal affairs rubbed his temples. Franklin is good, better than we anticipated, and having a federal judge as a witness is a nightmare scenario. What about the video evidence? Tell me we at least secured that. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The court ordered it sealed from public release. The legal director finally answered, "But we've discovered there was a live stream from another passenger that we weren't aware of. It's archived on several platforms now." "Damn it," the CEO exploded. "Find a way to contain this, whatever it costs." But some things once set in motion cannot be contained, especially when truth and justice hang in the balance. Rain pelted the windows of the Washington family home as Tara sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and legal documents. 3 months had passed since the incident on Flight 1382, and the toll was becoming increasingly visible. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and stress had etched new lines into her face as she calculated figures on a worn calculator. Malcolm's medical bills had continued to mount, despite Alliance Airlines' initial promise to cover all expenses. The insurance company was disputing certain non-essential treatments, including the specialized physical therapy needed to help Malcolm regain full jaw function. Meanwhile, Tara had exhausted her paid leave and was now taking unpaid time off to care for her son and attend the seemingly endless legal proceedings. In the living room, Malcolm sat silently working on his laptop. The wires had been removed from his jaw 2 weeks earlier, but he still spoke infrequently, his voice altered by the injury and subsequent surgeries. The summer STEM program he'd been so excited about had continued without him, his chance at that prestigious opportunity lost. Though the program directors had expressed sympathy and offered to consider him for next year, Malcolm had withdrawn into himself, his former confidence shattered. Tara's phone buzzed with a text from Drake. "Flight delayed again. Chicago is fogged in. Won't make tonight's meeting with Franklin. Can you handle it alone?" She sighed heavily, typing back a quick acknowledgement. Drake had been commuting between Chicago and Atlanta regularly to support Malcolm and attend legal meetings, but the strain was showing in his professional life. His software development team had been understanding initially, but as weeks turned into months, patience was wearing thin. His last performance review had included concerns about his focus and availability. The doorbell rang, startling both Tara and Malcolm. It was unusual to have visitors, especially on a rainy Tuesday evening. "I'll get it," Tara said, noting how Malcolm tensed at unexpected sounds these days. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a delivery uniform holding a package. She opened the door cautiously. "Delivery for Washington," he announced, holding out a tablet for her signature. After signing, Tara brought the unmarked manila envelope to the kitchen table. Inside was a USB drive and a typed note. "Mrs. Washington, I believe you should see this. I used to work in HR at Alliance Airlines. What they're doing to your family isn't right." Suspicious but curious, Tara inserted the drive into her laptop. It contained dozens of internal emails and documents from Alliance Airlines, dating back years before Malcolm's incident. As she read through them, her hand rose to cover her mouth in shock. There were multiple complaints against Brian Connor from minority passengers consistently buried or dismissed through procedural technicalities. More disturbing were the training materials that contained coded language, instructing flight attendants on passenger profiling and maintaining cabin culture, thinly veiled directions for treating certain passengers differently based on appearance and perceived status. Most damning of all was an email chain from the day after Malcolm's assault, explicitly discussing strategies to sanitize Connor's personnel file and find ways to create reasonable doubt about the Washington kid's account. Tara was still processing this information when her phone rang. It was Terrence Franklin. "Tara, are you watching the news?" he asked without preamble, his voice tense. "No, I've been going through bills and something else I need to tell you about," she replied. "Turn it on. Channel 7. Tara moved to the living room television and switched it on. A serious-looking news anchor was mid-sentence. "Exclusive report on the Alliance Airlines lawsuit that has captured national attention. New developments suggest the incident may have been misrepresented by the Washington family." The screen cut to a reporter standing outside the federal courthouse. Sources close to the investigation have revealed that Malcolm Washington, the 12-year-old at the center of the controversial lawsuit against Alliance Airlines, has a history of behavioral issues that weren't previously disclosed. School records allegedly show multiple incidents of classroom disruption, and medical records indicate the boy was once prescribed medication for impulse control problems. Tara froze, her blood running cold. None of this was true. Malcolm had always been an exemplary student with perfect behavior records. He had never been prescribed behavioral medication of any kind. The reporter continued. Additionally, financial records suggest the Washington family was facing significant debt before the incident, raising questions about potential financial motivation behind the lawsuit. "This is a lie," Tara whispered, her hand trembling as she held the phone. "All of it." Malcolm had come to stand beside her, his face pale as he watched himself being systematically defamed on national television. "Terrence, how are they doing this? Those records don't exist, because none of this ever happened." "They're fabricating evidence," Franklin replied grimly. "I've already filed for an emergency hearing and issued cease and desist letters to every network running the story, but the damage is being done. We need to counter this immediately." "I have something that might help," Tara said, explaining about the USB drive and its contents. "Don't touch anything else on that drive," Franklin warned. "We need to authenticate those documents through proper legal channels. This could be crucial evidence, but it could also be inadmissible if not handled correctly." After ending the call, Tara turned to Malcolm, who had returned to the couch and sat with his head in his hands. "Baby, none of what they're saying is true. We're going to fight this." Malcolm looked up, his eyes reflecting a weariness no 12-year-old should know. "Does it matter? Everyone at school will see this. All those kids from the STEM program will think I'm some kind of problem child who attacked a flight attendant." The doorbell rang again. This time it was a local news van, then another. Within minutes, their modest home was surrounded by media bright lights, illuminating the rain-streaked windows as reporters shouted questions from the front lawn. Tara called the police to disperse the media for trespassing, but the damage was spreading online. Social media had erupted with hashtags like #airline-hoax and #Washington-scam. Doctored photos of Malcolm appeared, allegedly showing him in various acts of misbehavior. By morning, the situation had deteriorated further. Judge Richardson had been formally accused of judicial misconduct for her inappropriate involvement in the case. The Judicial Ethics Board had received an anonymous complaint complete with fabricated emails suggesting Richardson had a personal connection to the Washington family predating the incident. When Terrence Franklin arrived at the Washington home the next day, his normally confident demeanor was strained. "They're throwing everything they have at us," he explained, as they gathered in the kitchen away from the windows where occasional photographers still lurked. "This is a coordinated character assassination campaign designed to pressure us into dropping the case or accepting a minimal settlement. Can they really get away with making up lies about a child?" Drake asked, having finally arrived from Chicago after multiple flight delays. They're counting on the fact that most people only remember headlines, not retractions, Franklin explained. Even if we disprove every false claim, which we will, some of the mud will stick. Meanwhile, they'll offer a settlement with an NDA so strict you couldn't even tell your own families what really happened. I won't sign anything, Malcolm said suddenly, his voice still raspy from his healing jaw. It was the first time he'd spoken directly about the case in weeks. They hurt me because they thought they could get away with it, because they thought no one would believe me. The room fell silent as the adults turned to look at the boy, struck by the clarity and determination in his words. They hurt other people too, he continued, gesturing toward the USB drive. If we give up now, they'll keep doing it. Tara moved to sit beside her son, taking his hand. Malcolm's right. We didn't ask for this fight, but we're not backing down. Franklin nodded slowly. Then, we need to change strategies. They're fighting a PR battle, not just a legal one. We need to do the same. Hal Drake asked. We don't have their resources or connections. No, Franklin agreed, but we have something more powerful, the truth. And I have an idea about how to use it. That evening, while reviewing case documents, Franklin received a call from an unlisted number. Normally, he would ignore such calls, but something made him answer. Mr. Franklin, this is Emily Daniels. I was a flight attendant with Alliance Airlines until last month. The woman's voice was nervous, barely above a whisper. I was on Flight 1382 with Brian Connor. I've been watching what they're doing to that boy on the news, and I can't stay silent anymore. Franklin sat up straighter. Miss Daniels, I appreciate your call, but why are you contacting me now, 3 months after the incident? Because they made us sign non-disclosure agreements immediately after it happened. They threatened our jobs. But I quit last month, and I've kept a copy of the unaltered flight log and crew reports that contradict everything Connor claimed. I also have recordings of the coaching sessions they gave us before we were interviewed by investigators. This was the break they needed, a credible insider willing to expose Alliance Airlines' cover-up attempts. Combined with the documents on the USB drive and testimony from Judge Richardson, they might finally be able to turn the tide. But as Franklin well knew from decades of civil rights cases, the darkest hour often comes just before a breakthrough. The Washington family would need to hold firm against the storm of defamation and intimidation that was only growing stronger. That night, as Malcolm finally slept, Tara sat on the edge of his bed watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The bruises on his face had faded, but the invisible scars, the fear, the loss of innocence, the harsh lesson about how the world sometimes treated young black boys, those would take much longer to heal if they ever did completely. She made a silent promise to her son. Justice would come no matter what it took. The truth would prevail. Autumn leaves swirled across the courthouse steps as Malcolm Washington mounted them, slowly flanked by his parents and attorney. 4 months had passed since the incident aboard Flight 1382, and today marked a crucial hearing that could determine the direction of the case. Despite the cool October morning perspiration beaded on Malcolm's forehead, a side effect of the anxiety that had become his constant companion. The previous weeks had been brutal. Alliance Airlines' smear campaign had penetrated every aspect of the Washingtons' lives. Malcolm had transferred to online schooling after relentless bullying from classmates who had seen the fabricated news stories. Tara had been passed over for a promotion she'd been working toward for years, with her supervisor citing concerns about her availability and focus given the ongoing lawsuit. Drake's team in Chicago had been reassigned to another project manager, effectively demoting him without officially changing his title. But something had shifted 3 days ago, something that gave them renewed hope as they entered the courthouse. The change had begun with Kai Rivera, a 16-year-old tech prodigy who had been following Malcolm's case online. As a fellow minority student in STEM fields, Kai had been disturbed by the treatment Malcolm was receiving. When he noticed inconsistencies in the video clips being shown on news programs, his curiosity was piqued. Using advanced digital forensics techniques he'd been studying, Kai had discovered that the classroom disruption video allegedly showing Malcolm was actually footage of an entirely different child digitally altered to resemble Malcolm. Furthermore, he'd managed to locate a previously unknown live stream from a passenger on Flight 1382 who had been quietly recording much of the flight for a travel vlog. This unedited footage, lasting nearly 40 minutes, captured not only the assault itself, but the pattern of discriminatory behavior from Brian Connor throughout the flight. Most crucially, it showed Malcolm sitting perfectly still when Connor claimed the boy had lunged at him, proving definitively that the assault was entirely unprovoked. Kai had reached out to the Washingtons through social media, sharing his findings. Terrence Franklin had immediately brought in digital forensics experts to authenticate the footage and document the manipulation of the other videos being used against Malcolm. Today's emergency hearing had been called to present this evidence to Judge Harmon and address the systematic campaign of evidence tampering and defamation. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Alliance Airlines' legal team appeared uncharacteristically subdued, their usual confidence noticeably diminished. Brian Connor was absent, having apparently called in sick at the last minute. Judge Harmon entered his expression severe as he took his seat at the bench. Counsel, I've reviewed the emergency motions filed by both parties, and I must say I am deeply troubled by the allegations presented. Mr. Franklin, you may proceed. Franklin approached the podium with the measured confidence of someone holding a winning hand. Your Honor, we have uncovered evidence of systematic fraud, evidence tampering, and defamation by the defendants that strikes at the very heart of our justice system. He proceeded to present their findings methodically. The authenticated live stream footage, the expert testimony confirming digital manipulation of videos used against Malcolm, affidavits from former Alliance employees, including Emily Daniels, about the cover-up efforts and documentation of the coordinated media campaign designed to discredit a 12-year-old victim. Furthermore, Franklin continued, we have obtained evidence that Alliance Airlines has been systematically erasing or altering records of discrimination complaints, particularly those involving Brian Connor and several other employees. At this, Howard Griffith finally rose to object. Your Honor, these are outrageous accusations without foundation. Mr. Franklin is engaging in theatrical. Judge Harmon cut him off with a raised hand. Mr. Griffith, I'm not interested in your characterizations at this moment. I want to hear your substantive response to these allegations, particularly regarding the apparently authentic, unedited footage that clearly contradicts your client's sworn statements. Griffith hesitated, visibly off balance. Your Honor, we would need time to authenticate this alleged new evidence, and the evidence has already been authenticated by 3 independent forensic experts, Franklin interjected, presenting the reports. Their credentials are impeccable, and they have testified under oath. As the hearing continued, a remarkable shift occurred in the courtroom. Several members of Alliance Airlines' legal team began passing notes among themselves, their expressions growing increasingly concerned. One junior attorney even gathered her papers and quietly exited the courtroom, phone already at her ear. The turning point came when Franklin called an unexpected witness, Judge Elaine Richardson herself. Your Honor, we recognize the unusual nature of having a sitting federal judge testify in these proceedings. But given the defendant's attack on Judge Richardson's integrity and the formal complaint filed against her with the Judicial Ethics Board, we believe her testimony is essential. Judge Harmon nodded. Proceed, Mr. Franklin. Judge Richardson took the stand with the dignified bearing that had marked her 25 years on the federal bench. She detailed her observations from Flight 1382, the systematic discrimination she witnessed, and the assault on Malcolm that had occurred directly in her line of sight. Your Honor, she said, addressing Judge Harmon directly in my years on the bench, I have never witnessed such a blatant act of discrimination and violence, nor such a coordinated attempt to cover it up afterward. The complaint filed against me contained fabricated emails and invented connections to the Washington family. I have never met them prior to that flight, nor did I have any personal interest in this case beyond seeing justice done for a child who was seriously injured before my eyes. Franklin then presented evidence from the Department of Justice, which had launched its own investigation into Alliance Airlines practices following Judge Richardson's initial report. Their preliminary findings indicated a pattern of discriminatory treatment toward minority passengers across multiple flights and airports. By the time the hearing concluded 3 hours later, the momentum had shifted decisively. Judge Harmon issued a series of unprecedented rulings. First, he referred the Alliance Airlines legal team to the Bar Association for ethics violations related to evidence tampering and witness intimidation. Second, he ordered an immediate forensic audit of all Alliance Airlines records related to discrimination complaints to be conducted by a court-appointed independent examiner. Third, he issued sanctions against Alliance Airlines for their defamation campaign against Malcolm, ordering an immediate retraction of all false statements and the payment of interim damages to cover the Washington family's mounting medical and legal expenses. Most significantly, he referred the case to the Department of Justice for potential criminal charges related to civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and corporate fraud. This court will not tolerate the intimidation of witnesses, the defamation of a minor plaintiff, or the systematic manipulation of evidence. Judge Harmon declared, his voice resonating through the stunned courtroom. The conduct exhibited by the defendants strikes at the very foundation of our legal system. Outside the courthouse, a very different media scene awaited the Washington family. The narrative had already begun to shift dramatically, with headlines now focusing on the corporate cover-up and justice for Malcolm. The same reporters who had questioned Malcolm's character weeks earlier now shouted questions about his courage in standing up to corporate intimidation. Terrence Franklin fielded a few questions, emphasizing that while today represented a significant victory, the fight was far from over. The Washington family has endured months of character assassination and intimidation simply for seeking justice after their son was assaulted. Today's rulings confirm what we've maintained from the beginning, that Alliance Airlines engaged in discriminatory practices followed by a coordinated cover-up attempt. We look forward to the full trial, where all the facts will finally come to light. As they descended the courthouse steps, Malcolm noticed a teenage boy standing at the periphery of the crowd, hanging back from the media frenzy. He immediately recognized Kai Rivera from their video calls, the young tech expert who had helped uncover the digital evidence that changed everything. Breaking away from his parents momentarily, Malcolm approached Kai and extended his hand. "Thank you," he said, simply, his voice still affected by his healing jaw, but stronger than it had been in months. Kai shook his hand firmly. "Us STEM kids have to stick together," he replied with a small smile. "What they did to you wasn't right. I just used the skills I had to help." This quiet exchange, unnoticed by the clamoring reporters, represented something profound. The next generation of young minds refusing to accept injustice, using their talents and technology to expose truth when traditional systems failed. Later that evening, as news of the day's proceedings dominated the headlines, Brian Connor sat alone in his apartment, staring at his phone. He had received a terse email from Alliance Airlines legal department earlier, informing him that in light of emerging evidence, the company would no longer be covering his legal expenses. The implication was clear: he was being cut loose to face the consequences alone. His phone rang with a call from Howard Griffith. Connor answered hesitantly. "The company is preparing to settle," Griffith informed him bluntly. "They'll be distancing themselves from your actions, characterizing them as contrary to company policy and training. You should secure separate counsel immediately." The call ended as abruptly as it had begun. Connor sat in stunned silence, the reality of his situation sinking in. The corporate machine that had protected him, encouraged his behavior, and then orchestrated the cover-up was now abandoning him to save itself. Meanwhile, in the Washington home, a different scene unfolded. For the first time in months, there was cautious celebration. Malcolm had even invited his friend Jaden over the first social interaction he'd initiated since the incident. As Tara prepared dinner, she overheard the boys talking in the living room. "Are you still going to apply for the STEM program next summer?" Jaden asked. There was a pause before Malcolm answered. "Yeah, I think I am. What happened to me was wrong, but I can't let it stop me from doing what I love." Tara paused, wooden spoon in hand, as tears welled in her eyes. This was the first time she'd heard Malcolm speak about the future with hope since the assault. It was a small moment, but in it she saw the first real sign of healing in her son. The legal battle was far from over. There would be more hearings, more testimony, perhaps even a full trial. The road to complete justice remained long and uncertain. But something fundamental had changed today. The truth had emerged powerful enough to begin shifting the balance of a system that too often protected the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. For the Washington family, this turning point represented more than just a legal victory. It was a vindication of their decision to stand firm against intimidation, to fight not just for themselves, but for principle. It was proof that sometimes, against all odds, justice could prevail. The federal courthouse stood silhouetted against a brilliant blue sky on a crisp spring morning, exactly 10 months after the incident that had changed Malcolm Washington's life forever. The building's imposing marble columns, designed to evoke the permanence and gravity of American justice, seemed particularly fitting today, as the Washington family climbed the steps for what would likely be their final appearance in this landmark case. Malcolm, now 13, moved with confidence that had been absent during their earlier court appearances. Though a thin scar remained along his jawline, his physical recovery was nearly complete. The psychological healing had been slower, but steady, supported by therapy and the unwavering advocacy of his parents. Inside courtroom 3, the gallery was packed with observers. The case had captured national attention, evolving from what Alliance Airlines had initially dismissed as a minor incident into a watershed moment for corporate accountability and civil rights. Representatives from major media outlets, civil rights organizations, and even several members of Congress were present for the final ruling. Judge William Harmon entered, his face solemn, as he took his place at the bench. "Be seated," he instructed the crowded room. The proceedings began with a formality that belied their historic significance. Judge Harmon reviewed the case history, including the evidence of discrimination, assault, and the subsequent cover-up attempt. He noted the Department of Justice's parallel investigation, which had already resulted in criminal charges against several Alliance Airlines executives for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. Brian Connor had pleaded guilty to assault and civil rights violations 3 months earlier, accepting a plea deal that included prison time and community service. His testimony about Alliance Airlines' unwritten policies regarding passenger management had been damning, revealing a corporate culture that tacitly encouraged discriminatory treatment while maintaining plausible deniability. Before delivering my ruling, Judge Harmon stated, "I would like to hear directly from Malcolm Washington." A hush fell over the courtroom as Malcolm rose and approached the stand. Gone was the traumatized child who had been unable to speak at the early hearings. In his place stood a young man who had found his voice through the most difficult of circumstances. Malcolm, Judge Harmon said gently, "Would you please share with the court in your own words how this experience has affected you and what you hope will come from these proceedings?" Malcolm took a deep breath, his eyes briefly meeting those of his parents before addressing the judge. "Your Honor, when I boarded that flight last year, I was excited about attending a STEM program I'd worked hard to get into. I'd never experienced anything like what happened to me that day." His voice, though young, carried clearly through the silent courtroom. "After Mr. Connor broke my jaw, the pain was terrible, but honestly, that wasn't the worst part." He paused, collecting his thoughts. The worst part was watching how a company with so much power tried to make me into someone I'm not. They said I was violent when I wasn't. They said I had behavior problems when I didn't. They tried to make it seem like my family was just after money, when all we wanted was for them to admit what really happened and make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. Malcolm's gaze swept across the courtroom, momentarily resting on the Alliance Airlines representatives. I missed out on the STEM program. I had to change schools because of the bullying after those false stories came out. I couldn't eat solid food for months. I still have nightmares sometimes. He squared his shoulders slightly. But I also learned something important. I learned that telling the truth matters, even when powerful people want you to be quiet. I learned that standing up for what's right is worth it, even when it's really hard. His voice grew stronger. What I want from this case is for airlines, for all companies to know they can't treat people differently because of what they look like. I want them to know they can't hurt someone and then use their money and power to cover it up. And I want other kids like me to know that they deserve respect and justice no matter who they are. There wasn't a sound in the courtroom as Malcolm finished speaking. Judge Harmon nodded thoughtfully, thanking him for his statement. As Malcolm returned to his seat, several jurors were visibly moved, discreetly wiping away tears. After Malcolm's testimony, Judge Harmon proceeded with his ruling. The decision was comprehensive and historic, addressing not only the specifics of Malcolm's case, but the broader implications for the airline industry and corporate accountability. First, he announced the jury's unanimous verdict, finding Alliance Airlines liable for discriminatory practices, negligent hiring and supervision, and creating a hostile environment that led to Malcolm's assault. The damages awarded to the Washington family were substantial, $15 million, one of the largest settlements ever in a civil rights case involving a minor. More significantly, Judge Harmon imposed additional requirements that went beyond monetary compensation. Alliance Airlines will implement a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all employees to be designed and overseen by independent civil rights experts, he ordered. The company will also establish transparent hiring practices aimed at increasing diversity at all levels of the organization, with particular emphasis on management positions. He continued. Furthermore, Alliance Airlines will create and maintain a public database tracking all discrimination complaints, their investigations, and resolutions. This information will be available to passengers, regulators, and the public. Most groundbreaking was his final pronouncement. Given the evidence presented of industry-wide discrimination issues, this court is ordering a comprehensive review of unaccompanied minor policies across all U.S. airlines to be conducted by the Department of Transportation in conjunction with civil rights organizations. As Judge Harmon concluded the proceedings, the significance of the ruling rippled through the courtroom. This wasn't just a victory for one family. It was a watershed moment that would reshape how corporations handle discrimination cases and protect vulnerable travelers across the nation. Outside the courthouse, Malcolm stood between his parents as Terrence Franklin addressed the waiting media. Today's ruling sends a clear message that corporations, no matter how powerful, cannot escape accountability when they harm those they're meant to serve, Franklin stated. The Washington family endured 10 months of legal battles, character assassination, and intimidation tactics. They stood firm not just for themselves, but for everyone who has ever been mistreated because of the color of their skin. As Franklin concluded his statement, Judge Richardson approached the family. She had been vindicated months earlier when the Judicial Ethics Board dismissed all complaints against her as fabricated. Her testimony had been crucial to securing justice for Malcolm. "You showed extraordinary courage, young man," she told Malcolm quietly. "You've changed things for the better." Malcolm nodded, understanding the significance of her words. "Thank you for standing up for me that day on the plane," he replied. "Most people just looked away." 1 year later, Malcolm Washington boarded another flight, this time with his father beside him. They were traveling to the prestigious National STEM competition, where Malcolm's coding project had earned him a finalist position. As they settled into their seats, Malcolm noticed the visible changes Alliance Airlines had implemented since the lawsuit. New digital displays throughout the cabin highlighted the airline's anti-discrimination policies and passenger rights. The flight attendant crew was notably diverse, and each crew member wore a small pin reading "Respect for All." The lead flight attendant, a young black woman named Aisha Miller, recognized Malcolm as he boarded. She had been part of the employee advocacy group that had pushed for reforms within Alliance following his case. "It's an honor to have you on board, Malcolm," she said warmly. "Your courage changed everything for us. Many of us wanted to speak up about what was happening, but we were afraid until you showed it was possible to win." Malcolm smiled, no longer self-conscious about the faint scar along his jaw. "I just wanted to be treated like everyone else. And that's exactly what your case helped ensure," she replied. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Malcolm looked out the window at the sprawling airport below. The journey had been long and painful, but the outcome had created ripples far beyond what any of them had imagined. The Department of Transportation's industry-wide review had revealed systemic discrimination issues across multiple airlines, resulting in standardized protection protocols for all passengers with special provisions for unaccompanied minors. Brian Connor was serving his sentence with part of his community service dedicated to speaking to airline employees about the consequences of discrimination. Most importantly, Malcolm had found his voice and purpose through the ordeal. His experience had inspired him to expand his coding project into an app that helped young travelers document and report mistreatment. The prototype had already caught the attention of civil rights organizations and tech investors. As the plane lifted off, Malcolm felt a sense of closure. The trauma would always be part of his story, but it no longer defined him. What defined him now was how he had transformed his pain into purpose, standing up not just for himself, but for countless others who might never know his name but would benefit from his courage. In that moment, as the ground fell away beneath him and the vast sky opened up ahead, Malcolm Washington understood that sometimes justice does prevail, not easily or quickly, but through persistence, truth, and the willingness to stand firm when it would be easier to give up. The story of Malcolm Washington illuminates powerful truths about courage in the face of systemic discrimination. It shows us how institutions often protect themselves rather than addressing injustice, expecting victims, especially young minorities, to remain silent. Malcolm's journey demonstrates that standing firm against overwhelming opposition can create ripples of change extending far beyond a single case. True accountability requires transparency. Alliance Airlines' attempts to bury evidence and discredit a child backfired spectacularly, exposing deeper patterns of discrimination that might otherwise have remained hidden. The case reveals how corporate power structures will deploy considerable resources to maintain the status quo rather than acknowledge wrongdoing. Judge Richardson's decision to speak up when others looked away changed everything. Without her intervention, Malcolm might have become just another statistic, another incident quietly settled and forgotten behind closed doors. Her actions remind us that witnesses have power and responsibility. Technology and youth activism are reshaping justice. When traditional systems failed, Kai's technical skills exposed the truth, showing how the next generation is forging new pathways to accountability. This represents a democratization of justice previously impossible in cases where corporate power dominated the narrative. Malcolm's transformation from victim to advocate teaches us that our most painful experiences can become catalysts for meaningful change, not just for ourselves, but for countless others who will never face the same injustice, because someone found the courage to say, "This ends now." Has Malcolm's story inspired you to speak up the next time you witness discrimination? Which character in this powerful account do you relate to most? Malcolm Judge Richardson, or perhaps Kai, who used his technical skills to uncover the spast? Truth. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content that shines light on these important issues. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear that justice is possible even against powerful institutions. Thank you for joining us today in this journey toward a more just world. Remember, courage is contagious. Your voice matters more than you know.